Welcome back to the Paranormal Girl podcast. I am your host, Kristen. There is a mysterious legend involving a once bustling small village along the southern shore of the Kenai Peninsula in Alaska. It involves mysterious deaths, men who went into the forest and never returned, workers and residents who feared for their safety, once populated homes and businesses left abandoned almost overnight. This legend says there was something lurking in the surrounding forest, something big and hairy that stood on 2 feet. The natives called it the Nantinaq, which has a couple of possible translations. Some say it means giant, hairy thing. Some say it means half man, half beast. And then there are some who will tell you that Nantinaq just does not translate into something we would understand. Today's guest prefers the latter. Got a great show for you guys today. Let's do a word from our sponsor, and then I will bring him on. Grab the oven mitts, because this news is too hot to handle. As we feast our way through mountains of mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce, let's chat about the unsung hero of the holiday season, the Manscaped Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. That's right, it's time to say goodbye to your man's old razor and make sure he's as smooth as the pumpkins on the doorstep. Hop over to manscaped.com, and when you use code PNG, you'll score 20% off and free shipping. Get ready for your man to gobble, wobble, and glide his way through thankful season with the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. I have so much to be thankful for this season. I am thankful, of course, for my family and friends, for this show, for you guys watching and listening out there. I am also thankful for a partner who is always looking fly. He is so well groomed and attentive to the small details. It's awesome to look your best for your own well-being and confidence because you want to, but the care and attention that Lee applies to his grooming never goes unappreciated by moi. And I am thankful that it's all the more convenient and simple for him to continue his self-care routine with the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. Ladies, your fella can use it on both wet or dry skin. In low light settings, the LED spotlight ensures he doesn't miss a spot. And whether he is wrangling a full-on forest or knocking out some stubborn stubble, the dual skin-safe blade heads provide the turkey carving that he needs. Happy Turkey Day! So get 20% off and free shipping with code PNG at manscaped.com. That is 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com when you use code PNG. Be thankful this holiday season for the best gift of all from Manscaped. My guest is an experienced Bigfoot investigator and field researcher with a background in law enforcement. He has been featured on the Travel Channel and in the Small Town Monsters series Alaskan Coastal Sasquatch and Dark Coast. In 2018, he was part of the first team to investigate Port Chatham in search of its legendary creature, and he was featured prominently in the Extreme Expeditions Northwest documentary In Search of the Port Chatham Hairy Man. He is also an author who wrote about the area, legend, and experience filming there in his book, Abandoned, The History and Horror of Port Chatham, Alaska. Please enjoy my conversation with Larry Beans Baxter.
I was born in Kentucky, raised down there in Kentucky, in western Kentucky, in a place called Muhlenberg County. There's a song about it, Paradise by John Prine. I grew up there, joined the military when I turned 21. I said, I don't care where the Army sends me as long as it's nowhere cold, and straight to Alaska I went. But the joke was on them because I actually enjoyed it up here. I love it up here. And I ended up staying. And all my life, I've been interested in the strange and unexplained, ghost stories, UFOs, Bigfoot, stuff like that. And I got up here to Alaska, and I was like, man, there's like Bigfoot stuff going on up here. I could actually like look into to Bigfoot up here, and that kind of got me interested in the subject even more, to where I kind of focused all my attention on that. And I started going out in the field and looking for Bigfoot up here, and that got the attention of some other Bigfooters like Stephen Major and those guys, and that got me into the Port Chatham expedition, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And that's it in a nutshell, really. That's the 30,000 view of it. I got into law enforcement up here in Alaska. I was a police officer and a soldier for the last 20 years, and just recently retired from law enforcement up here in Alaska.
Wow, wow. Is it as cold as I imagine it is all the time?
It depends on where you're at. Up north, obviously around Fairbanks and further, it's pretty darn cold. I live on the Kenai Peninsula, so we have a mix. Like the other day, it was almost 40 degrees. Today, it's 20. So it just depends on the day and the weather.
Oh, well, I got so used to warm weather. I'm really I'm not a cold weather person, so I want to see Alaska at some point, but I'm like, okay, I got to find an area that's like, I'm not going to freeze my buns off. Well, okay, well, your lifelong passion and interest in things like Bigfoot and cryptid, but other things that reflects on your show, Alasquatch. You have a podcast. Would you introduce my audience to your show?
Yeah, it's called Alasquatch. It's a show about all things cryptid in the great state of Alaska. I talk about all kinds of things, mostly pertaining to Alaska, but sometimes I'll delve into other subject areas and things like that. Occasionally, I'll get somebody that'll contact me and like, hey, I want to tell you about my sighting that happened in like New York or something, and I'm like, I'm trying to keep it Alaska centric, so maybe not. But yeah, I'd like to explore. Alaska has a rich history of cryptids and unexplained animals. There's all kinds of things up here. If you could delve into the native legends, they have all kinds of strange creatures that they've been seeing for years. Strange like chimera creatures, like a wolf slash like killer whale hybrid, stuff like that. I mean, all kinds of crazy things. And not crazy like bad, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
crazy as in that's very out there. Um, but yeah, and then of course, Bigfoot. All the natives have some kind of hairy man or big hairy person legend, and that's what makes it one of the most compelling ones to me. Is just because it's such a shared uh, archetype throughout all the. I mean, not just here in Alaska, but all through North America, even into South America. They all have some kind of wild man or hairy man that it's large in stature, and it's very compelling, just to the
Yeah.
point where I think if it was just the legends and not the sightings, I think maybe you could dismiss it a little easier. Or if it was just the sightings and not the legends,
Hmm.
but the fact that you have both makes it really compelling in my eyes.
Yeah, yeah, and I that gets lost on skeptics of the subject that there is this prior history. It's set a precedent, and it's not just stories, and it's not just all like supernatural. There is that element to it that there's these supernatural aspects to these beings, but some of these tribes were describing animals, just another
Yeah.
animal out in the woods, and yeah, I found that so compelling too, and especially in the descriptions, is exactly what people are describing today.
Yeah. And I mean, if you talk to filthy casuals, uh, if you get that reference, uh, they'll say things like, "Well, isn't there one Bigfoot and it was filmed in California?" Referencing the PG film, or they'll say like, "Oh, well, didn't that all start in the '60s in California with the footprints that were found?" And they don't realize, like, up here in Alaska. I mean, we're going to get into Port Chatham here in a little bit, I assume. That stuff was all way before the stuff in California with the Jerry Crew prints or anything like that. That was decades before any of that.
Yeah. No, we are going to get into it. And feel free if you want to weave it in. It doesn't have to go a certain way today, but yeah, we will be talking about that. So you've been able to be a part of a bunch of expeditions, like hands-on. Like how often do you get to go boots on the ground up there?
Well, I'm sorry, my dog is he
Arlo.
really wants to participate.
It's okay.
During the summer, we have such crazy winters here that I usually don't get out a whole lot during the winter unless we have a milder winter. Then I can get out some. But during the summer, that's usually my crunch time because I got to get out and enjoy the good weather and use it as much as I can.
Yeah.
So usually from like May to August, September-ish, I try and get out at least once a month, for a couple of days. It depends. Like just this last summer, we filmed the Dark Coast series with Small Town Monsters. I was out with them pretty much the entire month of July. Not June, July, June. We were out at Area A cabin almost the entire month. So, it just depends on what's, I have going on. But yeah, I try and get out at least once or twice a month during the summer. And I try and check out different places. I have one area where I kind of concentrate on that's not too far from me. And that's the problem with Alaska is it's so huge.
Mm-hmm.
But, I'll get reports. Somebody will be like, "Oh, hey, I saw this. Can you want to come check it out?" And I look on the map and it's like 10 hours away from my house. And I'm like, I just can't. I'm sorry. It would take me 2 days to get there.
Yeah.
And so, I have a few areas nearby that I concentrate on. I try out new places when I can, but it's kind of daunting when you have an area the size of Alaska. People say, "Oh, I'd love to come up there and look for Bigfoot. I think it would be great." And I'm like, it's not really all it's cracked up to be because you've got such a large area to like pick from and choose from, and then some of it, it's like, oh man, I want to go check out this, like Port Chatham. I want to go check out this area. It's awesome. Good luck getting there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then you have to get permission to even be there, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they might take a cue from the Dark Coast series, which took place in a specific area, something they refer to as Area A. And yeah, I'm so glad you brought up
Yeah.
the Dark Coast because I had some questions about that. I love the series. I love that it's a limited series, listeners, 3 parts, and Beans is featured in there. First off, how was your experience filming with the Small Town Monsters guys?
It was pretty great. Alex and I were very similar in a lot of our views on Bigfoot and how to look for him. We both were just very similar in outlook on the subject, I guess. So we get along well. He's a very methodical researcher. He likes to go out and just boots on the ground. I'm of the mind, like, there's a lot of people that go out and they like to do whoops, knocks, calls, stuff like that. I'm more passive. I like to go in and just sit and listen and look and just check things out, almost like a hunter would. And I don't typically like to do whoops and knocks and calls and stuff like that unless maybe it's the last evening, there hasn't been anything going on, and then I'll try to maybe entice some activity. But for the most part, I just like to go into an area and just sit and look and listen, and just be kind of passive. But yeah, Alex is a interesting researcher, and he always brings in someone. Like we had Damon Irons out there, who I'd never met previously, and now he's a good friend. We had Rebecca Slick come out, who I'd never met previously, but is now a good friend. And he's just like, hey, let's try. Let's bring Damon out with his thermal drone. Let's bring Rebecca out because we almost never have a female presence out there. He's always up for like, oh, let's do this, let's do that. So it's really, kind of, because most of the time I go out by myself or just with a select group of people, and then I go out with Alex and he's like, let's call in this person and this person that has this specialty or that specialty. And
Yeah.
it's always a great experience, and I always learn something new when I go out with him and whoever he brings out.
Yeah, well, it's yeah, it's fascinating series. It's fun for me as an outsider to see all of the like the different ways that people like to do it, and you do get a sense like there's those who just kind of more so want to experience and allow it to happen, and then there's just those that'll they hear a sound and they're off into the forest. They want to chase it down. They want so badly to get something. I mean, everybody does that. We all want to see something and to prove this thing exists. But the Dark Coast series that took place, like I said, in an area that Alex called it Area A. I'm not sure if that's his own term that he gave it, or if that's well known in the Bigfoot world. But what is Area
So Area A, it was kind of a placeholder name. It it didn't really we didn't really plan on for it to stick, and we used it so much it ended up kind of sticking.
A? Okay.
It refers to a place near Seward, Alaska. There's a gentleman, a very avid outdoorsman, bought some land and built a cabin out there. And he's a lifelong hunter. Been in Alaska for years and years.
Hmm.
Not a Bigfoot guy. Never thought about Bigfoot really. And he bought this land to build this cabin on. And things started happening. He started hearing, vocalizations he couldn't place.
Hmm.
Things would occasionally like go missing or then like show back up. People were hearing voices kind of in the woods. He would bring workers out to like work on the cabin, and there was uh, just this cascade of things that kept happening to the point where he's like, I think this might be like Bigfoot activity, because he started doing some research into it once the stuff started happening. And he reached out to some researchers like myself and Alex and some other people, and had us come out there. And sometimes we'd go out there and nothing would happen, and sometimes we'd go out there and things would happen. It was kind of hit or miss. But when they were building the cabin, it was pretty consistent and pretty repeatable. Uh, for instance, the first time I went out there, he's like, "Well, I'm going to fire up the chainsaw and we'll cut up some firewood." And he goes, "That always seems to get them riled up." And because he started to witness patterns and stuff. But then after the cabin got built, it kind of died off a little bit. Personally, I think maybe the the novelty of the cabin is maybe worn off for them, or maybe they realize like, okay, it's just some dude building a cabin over there. He's not really bothering us. We don't have to worry about it, and they've kind of moved on. But occasionally stuff does still happen out there. I heard one of the clearest, crispest knocks I've ever heard out there one day, like in the middle of the afternoon. I was sitting on the porch of the on the swing, and it was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I just heard, just right up behind the cabin on the ridge, just the cleanest, crispest knock I've ever heard.
Huh.
And there's all kinds of audio from that place, of vocalizations and strange like mumbling and voice, almost reminiscent of the Sierra sounds. A lot of stuff going on there, but it's not as consistent as it was when he was initially building the cabin. And it really, it grabbed Alex's attention. He listened to the audio and was really compelled to go out there. And obviously, we've spent quite a bit of time out there. We spent an entire month up there last summer, and it's just really kind of captured the attention of Alex. And now that the series is out, a lot of other people as well.
Yeah. Well, and part of that pattern that you were talking about too, I heard this a couple of times. Wasn't there something with whenever there was just a female present like that got things riled up?
So there was a couple of occasions where the owner had some females out at the cabin, and on those occasions they heard what they described as a baby crying. And they've actually got it on audio. If you watch the Dark Coast series, you
Mhm.
can hear it. I'm a little skeptical on it personally. I kind of think it might be like a porcupine, uh,
Oh,
because porcupines will make a similar sound. But it is odd that it only seems to happen when there's females present. Um,
yeah.
and I believe Robert Alley, if you're familiar with him, he wrote Raincoast Sasquatch. He has brought up the fact that sometimes he believes that Sasquatch will make a sound that sounds like a baby crying when females are around to try and lure them into the woods. That's a theory he has. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's kind of compelling. We hear the sound only when females are around out there. So
Mhm.
maybe there's something to it.
Yeah, no, I'm on that where I do find I look for patterns. That is what compels me. If I can find a pattern in something, then then you can follow the trail to whatever, and that is compelling to me. So that stuck out to me. Prior to the Dark Coast series, there was another series, like a two-parter, the Alaskan, what was it called? Alaskan coastal Sasquatch, and you had been called in on the second part because they had found something rather unique, something very an exciting piece of evidence, and they called you in. You are prior law enforcement, so you have a very unique
Yeah. I
ability
have
to call. Yes,
a particular set of skills.
yes, yes. Thank you.
um, so Alex, I can't remember if it was Alex or the owner of the cabin that reached out to me initially. It was one of the two. I think it might have been the owner of the cabin. He says, "Hey, Alex, and those guys were out here filming, and they found a handprint on the back of the cabin. And he asked if I would be able to come out and swab it for DNA. And they sent me some pictures of it, and I was like, wow, that's kind of compelling. And I actually made it out there. It was a week or two after I think they had discovered it, and it was pretty interesting because of the location. It was probably about 6 foot off the ground, probably right around my head height, right underneath the bunk room window, which is where a lot of people, when we have guests at the cabin, that's where they sleep. That's where I sleep when I'm in the cabin. There is another incident when they were constructing the cabin of they didn't have that window there. It was kind of just framed in, and they had a piece of plywood covering this hole that they were using for entrance, a hole in the frame where that window would later go. And they had this large Yeti cooler pushed up against it to hold that plywood up. I mean, this is real, like it's in the middle of construction, they're just, it's basically just a roof and some rooms at that point. And sometime in the middle of the night, like 3 o'clock in the morning or so, something pushed on that plywood hard enough that full Yeti cooler slid across the room and hit the wall on the other side. The guy, of course, it's pitch black. The guys in the room start yelling, "Go away, bear! Go away, bear!" They can't see anything, but they think it's a bear, so they're yelling, "Go away, bear!" And then they hear something run up the hill, thump, 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 and whatever it was, if it was a bear, it would have had to be a massive one because it shoved that cooler all the way across the room. So, and this isn't this is a big Yeti cooler, like one you could put a person in almost. And that was pretty interesting. And that's the same room where this handprint was found, like right on this outside siding of that room, where people sleep. There's a window in there. A lot of people sleep when they sleep in there. They close the window, the blind. I usually leave it open. Uh, but so they call me out there. They're like, "Hey, can you take a look at this?" I get out there, and sure enough, there's a pretty. By the time I got there, it faded a little bit, but not much. You could still see it. You could still see where the fingers were. So I took some swabs, just like normal swabs that I would have processed a crime scene with. I like the capture swabs that have the little plastic cap over them that you can close them and protect the swab portion. So I think it was 6 swabs or something like that of it, from a couple from each finger and a couple from the palm. And we've sent it off. I believe I sent it to Doug Hycheck, and he sent it off for analysis. We're still waiting to hear back on that. That stuff takes a while. The crime lab, you were looking at like 6 months or more sometimes for
Oh,
DNA.
oh wow.
So I'm not sure where Doug sent it off to, but I'm assuming it's going to be a similar timeline. But I'm really excited to see what that yields, because it was just in a really weird place. It was, like I said, it was 6 feet off the ground. There's a large water tank in between. If a person was standing there, it would be in between the person and where the handprint was. So they'd have to stand on the other side of the water tank, lean over and put their hand up against the cabin, and it's at a weird angle, just not where you would expect a handprint to be. Uh, I was out there when we were working on when they were installing the gutter system and stuff for the cabin. There's like a rain collection system out there,
Mm-hmm.
and the only time that I could imagine that handprint would be put there would be during that process, and for it to go unnoticed for well over a year, like a year and a half, maybe even 2 years.
Right.
I don't. It all runs together. I've been going out there for a while now. Just seems kind of weird. I think it was probably placed there not too long before Alex and those guys got there. And it was a really waxy, like white substance that you hear a lot of with suspected Bigfoot handprints. Supposedly they have really oily skin.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, if a person, leaves a handprint or something like that, it usually will fade and it's not really readily visible unless you maybe throw some fingerprint powder or something on it, and then you can see it. This was visible without any type of powder or anything like that. It just popped out. You could just see it. And I'm really looking forward to those results. I guess there's always a possibility that it is a human print. I don't know. I think that I'd love to know the story of how it got there if it's human. But I told my wife, I'm like, we're going to get some champagne and put it away. And when those results get out, hopefully we can pop that out and pop a cork and have some champagne, because I'm hoping it's going to be unknown primate.
Yeah.
But who knows? I mean, and like I said, I know that if I get that DNA that it's unknown primate, I know that's not going to be enough to prove to the world that Bigfoot exists. I've got to that point. I've been Bigfooting long enough that I know that's not going to prove it.
Right.
It's going to be really compelling, and it's going to really, it might convince a few people, but it's not going to like convince the world. They're not going to officially recognize the species or anything like that. But it would be enough for me. Like that would be it for me. I'd be like, okay, they're real. Maybe I might move on to something else next. I might go look for a lake monster. I don't know, but yeah, that's a really compelling piece of evidence. I can't wait to get the results, but at the same time, I'm like, oh, what if it comes back as human? It's going to be so disappointing.
Yeah, it will, but at the same time, like that's why you do this. You prove all of the things that you can possibly prove to be otherwise, so that whatever is left over, that's what really just ignites people's passion about this topic. Like there's so many compelling pieces, unidentifiable hair samples and just the footprints with the dermal ridges, things that aren't going to convince the scientific community. Of course, if somebody's going to be skeptical about this subject, it's not going to convince them. But these are the things that bring somebody like me, who's new to the subject, anybody who's new to the subject, in and really perk up and start paying attention. Like there is something very strange going on here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and kind of knowing what I know about how like wildlife conservation, fish and game and stuff works, I seriously ponder that if a body is ever collected or found, that would be enough. I know people are like, he's crazy. A body would do it for sure. Honestly, I think if they was to find or come across a body, and especially if it's just one, they could be like, well, that's it. That's the last one. They were here, but now they're gone.
Right.
I believe Doug Hychek mentioned, he thinks that there needs to be two bodies, a male and a female, to prove that there's a breeding population out there.
Right.
But at the same time, even if you had the two bodies, what's to say they wouldn't be like, well, these are the last two, too bad we missed out, so
it's never good enough.
I almost feel like you would have to have a male female body and really, really, really good footage of a family unit still out there to prove it. But of course I'm old and cynical, police officer. So, I'm like, I've reached that stage where I'm just like, I don't think a body would do it. At least not, to the point to where they were put on a list where they existed. I think they would probably just write it off and be like, yeah, this is probably some kind of a genetic anomaly, or this is the last one and there aren't anymore.
Yeah, it sucks, but there's a level of cynicism there that is just kind of logical at this point, with how much evidence is enough. Oh, it's not, none of it is. Okay, well,
Yeah.
even if
Well,
you get a body, is it going to be good enough?
Because people say, well, no, there's not really any evidence. I hear this all the time. Well, there's not really any evidence. I've put people in jail. I've taken people's freedom from them with less evidence than there is for Bigfoot. You've got, on the criminal side, really all you need is an eyewitness account and some grainy video footage. I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
All I got to do is have one person say, that guy stole something out of my store. Here's the video. The video looks like it was taken on, like there's a bird in the camera drawing a picture of what it sees. It's like some grainy, like video security system from like the 1990s. And it vaguely looks like the suspect in question.
Yeah.
That's probable cause. I go out, arrest the guy or give him a summons, and he goes to a jury trial. The jury looks at that, hears the evidence, and puts him in jail. So that's enough to deprive someone of their freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just as much, if not more, similar evidence of the existence of Bigfoot, but that's not enough.
Isn't that nuts? The same can be said for the UFO phenomenon. I just got through a season on UFOs, and I had Kathleen Martin on the show, and she was telling me, some of the stuff that she had in her collection of evidence. It would convict in a court of law, and it's still, yeah. That's the sucky part of all this. But what was I had a thought, one more thought on the handprint. I was just thinking, like, it doesn't really make sense, does it, to think that, oh, well, this is a handprint from somebody who put this together, who put the material up, and they left behind a handprint, because that was, you said it was a year and a half before that it was.
Correct. And when Alex found it, it was more prominent than when I arrived.
Right.
So he found it. It was like it popped. Like it was that, that white, like waxy substance. He could see it easily. I got there. I could still see it, but I kind of had to shine some oblique light on it to really make it stand out. So from the time Alex found it to the time I got there to swab it, it had, which was only like a week or so, it had faded. So if it had been there for over a year, why would it suddenly start to deteriorate in that week and not before that?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for all of that. Let's talk Port Chatham. Okay, so you were involved with a documentary called In Search of the Port Chatham Hairy Man. Oh, we'll talk about it. You were also in one called Bigfoot Encounters in the Pacific Northwest, which is actually how we are here today. That's one of the first documentaries I watched in this search, and I was just blown away. Both of those were done by Extreme Expeditions Northwest LLC, Stephen Major. I was just curious, how did that connection take place? How did you get involved with them?
It's kind of a crazy story. So I had been getting into the Bigfoot thing and going out into the field and kind of looking, and I was so interested. I went to the International Bigfoot Conference that was in Kennewick there in Washington. Mm-hmm. And they had some special guests there, and one of those special guests was Adam Davies. Well, during the VIP dinner, I sat at Adam's table, and we chatted and we talked and we became friendly. And I started, I was following him on social media. Well, he posts one day, he's like, "Hey, I'm going to be off social media for a while. I'm going to Alaska. Cheers, everybody." You know how Adam is. And so I messaged him. I'm like, "Hey, I'm in Alaska. If you need anything, let me know. I'm here in Homer." And he's like, "Actually, I'm coming through Homer." So what that trip was him and Steven coming up here to do like a scouting thing for the documentary, for the In Search of the Port Chatham Hairy Man documentary.
Okay.
And so they got to Homer, and I offered Adam, I was like, "Hey, let me know. I'll buy you a drink or something when you come through." So he calls one day and he's like, "Hey, we're here. We're at this like bar down the road. Do you want to I'll take you up on that drink if you're available." I was like, "Sure." So I head down there. Well, Steven's there with him. So me, him, and Steven and my wife sat at this table in this bar, and we talked for probably a good 2 hours about Bigfoot. I'm telling him all the stuff I know about this area, about Port Chatham, all this stuff. Mm-hmm. I really kind of impressed Steven with my knowledge of the subject locally. And so we parted ways, and I kept in contact with Steven. Well, Adam was supposed to be in Search of the Port Chatham Hairy Man documentary, and it didn't work out. Like, he had work commitments. He couldn't do it. So Steven is like, "Hey, do you want to be in it? Because I need, it would help if I had somebody locally. You can provide firearms for protection and stuff like that. It'd be easier for me to get them from you than to bring them up there." And I was like, "Yeah, sure. I'll do it." And that's kind of how I got involved in the In Search of the Port Chatham Hairy Man documentary. And it was basically because I bought Adam a drink, and then I met Steven, and and I lived locally and had access to firearms and knowledge of the local wildlife and stuff like that. So I went along and brought my knowledge of the area plus my knowledge of local wildlife and my shotgun and pistol and stuff like that, so that we could feel safe, and bear spray. And that's kind of how it all came together. And yeah, it was a crazy experience. Like I was like walking. I remember like taking my first steps off the little boat there to Port Chatham, thinking like, this must be like what Neil Armstrong felt like when he stepped on the moon. Like I felt like I was going into like uncharted territory.
Yeah. Well, you really were in a sense. Yeah. Been a while since people had been there. Well, how long before that took place? Like, when did you actually start getting interested in Port Chatham and taking that deeper look at it?
Well, I always heard the story. What like when I moved up here, and anytime anybody brings up Bigfoot in Alaska, Port Chatham always comes up
Hmm.
in the conversation. And I mean, from where I'm sitting right now talking to you, it's like 40 miles over there. Like it's not very far at all from where we're at. But to get out there, you have to pay a lot of money for somebody with a boat to get you out there.
Sure.
Um, Depending on the size of the boat you want to take up there. But yeah, it's just ingrained in the history of Alaska and of Bigfoot. You can't talk about Alaska and Bigfoot without bringing it up. And people had brought it up. I had read up on it. Um, there was an article in the local paper here a few years ago that really it was the Homer Tribune article. If you search Port Chatham, Alaska, eventually you'll come across it. And that's kind of what it went viral. And that's kind of what brought the legend of Port Chatham, I guess, out into the mainstream. And there's an interview there with one of the elders that grew up there, and she talks about some of the legends and why Port Chatham got abandoned.
Hmm.
And I come across that when it came out, and so I'd always been aware of it, and I'd always wanted to go there, but I could never like convince anybody to take me, or it was always like cost prohibitive. And
Yeah.
so I'm really glad Stephen was able to come through when he did and make the documentary, because it really is an opportunity that not a whole lot of people get.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad that you did too. The documentary was outstanding. It was incredible, and yeah, you all were. You're very brave. I got to say, like in the course of my show, I'm fairly skeptical. I'm a skeptical believer about a lot of things. So there are it's a handful of things that I've come across, uh, stories or ideas or phenomena that really just give me the willies. And the story of Port Chatham did. It's one of them. Um, yeah, just incredible. And the book, you wrote a book a couple of years afterwards
Mm-hmm.
that details the legend and the history and also personal experiences on the documentary. It was just incredible. So, listeners, please check out the book. I'll link it below. But why don't you? I know people in the Bigfoot world know this story, but I didn't. I had no idea this thing existed. The story was there. And I've got a lot of ears on the show that are not necessarily Sasquatch people, so who have not heard it. Would you give us that history of Port Chatham? What happened there?
So Port Chatham was a small fishing village. It got founded in the early 1900s. They actually had, for such a small town, they had a lot of infrastructure. They had a processing plant for the fish. They had a cold storage um, building for the fish. They had a large sawmill which would cut the fish traps that they would use from the local forest. And it was a thriving little town. And then in the 1930s is when things kind of started to go south. You heard about people that were going. There was a prospector that went up looking for gold. He went missing. There was a gentleman that owned a logging operation. He was found deceased. They said that he had some trauma to his head, that a large piece of logging equipment had struck him in the head, and it was too heavy for a person to lift. So that kind of got blamed on what the locals call the Nantinaq, which is like the local Bigfoot legend. And they describe it. It says sometimes it depends on who you talk to. Nantinaq can mean different things. Some people describe it as saying like it's a giant hairy thing. Some people just say, well, it means Bigfoot, and some people say, well, it doesn't translate well. Like there's not a literal translation, which is the explanation that I like, is that there's not a literal translation. They do, like a lot of the other Alaska natives, they do kind of attribute some supernatural powers to their Nantinaq. He can shapeshift. He's supposed to have glowing red eyes. Um, there's actually a story. It's a lot like almost similar of the Kushtaka in Southeast, where people can actually turn into Nantinaqs, become hairy men. There's a story of a hunter who was out with a hunting party and told his hunting buddies, like, "Hey, I'm turning into the Nantinaq. Like, let me off here." And they kind of, "Oh yeah, whatever. You're full of it." And he becomes pretty insistent, so they do. Later on, they see him around a village. He's getting big and hairy, and he can barely talk. And he tells one of his buddies, he says, "Hey, tell my wife to stay at home and lock herself in the house with the kids, because I'm afraid if I see her out, I'm going to take her and turn her into an Nantinaq." So there's some supernatural elements to their beliefs in Bigfoot and the Nantinaq. I don't necessarily, I mean, I don't know where those would come from. I mean, possibly, there's a story of a hunter that shot an Nantinaq. It runs into like a thicket. He goes into the thicket to get it, and then the mouse runs out of the thicket, and he thinks, "Oh, the Bigfoot turned into the mouse," so they can shapeshift. So I don't know. I'm more of a grounded researcher. I think probably there's a more rational explanation for a lot of these things.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, like I don't know. Like maybe there is something supernatural about them or magical. I'm going to have to see that for myself before I go there, before I get that in that direction. It doesn't necessarily mean that I don't think there is any like supernatural or more mystical elements to life. I got to see it. So in the 30s, you had people going missing, you had people turning up dead. At one point, the workers in the processing plant, they go to the owners and they're like, "Look, something's out here. We don't feel safe. If you don't do something about it, we're going to walk." So they basically kind of threatened to strike. The owner of the processing plant, they kind of relent. They end up hiring some like like Pinkerton type security guards to come in and kind of pull security around the town while the workers are at work. And that seemed to satisfy the workers for a while. Then as things go on, like by 1950, the town was abandoned. There was one resident left, the postmaster. He left in the 1950s. And, with a lot of you have your typical ghost story or your ghost town story, where a town is founded around some kind of resource like gold or whatever, coal or whatever, what have you. They exploit the resource to the point of depletion, and then the town kind of dies, and then you're left with a ghost town.
Yeah.
Well, Port Chatham doesn't follow that, because you have, the town, they're there for the fish and the lumber. And then in 1950, when they left, well, there were still fish and lumber there. So it doesn't fit the typical ghost town narrative. Over the years, I mean, the natives attach a very, dark history to the place. And I've found in my experience and my research, it's kind of 50-50. You might go up to one guy and say, "Hey, what do you know about Port Chatham?" And they'll be like, "Oh my God, it's the most evil place. Don't go there. There's bad things there. It's evil. If you go there, bad things are going to happen." And then you'll ask the next guy you meet on the street, "Hey, tell me about Port Chatham." And they're like, "Yeah, it's just, there's woods, there's moose and bear over there. There's nothing mystical to it." So it's pretty much, even among the native community, it's kind of split 50-50 among those that believe and those that don't. In my experience, I've found that, or in my research, I found that it's kind of like, it reminds me a little bit of the Salem witch trials. So you know how the Salem witch trial is just this big, like, if you follow the history of it, you're led to believe that it was just this horrible massacre where all these people were like burned at the stake. And while there's some truth to it, there was witch trials, and there were people executed. It wasn't to the frequency or the manner that they say there was. And Port Chatham is kind of the same. There was Bigfoot activity there. There were Bigfoot sightings. There were disappearances. There were some odd deaths, although really the only one I can really point to is Mr. Camluck, the gentleman with the logging equipment. And I actually did quite a bit of research trying to get his death certificate, and it cannot be found. So, I mean, you can look at that one way or the other, like, oh, well, It just, there's nothing suspicious about it, or maybe it was hidden for a reason. I don't know. I'm not really a conspiracy guy.
Mhm.
Uh, I think most conspiracies can be explained with ignorance rather than malice. Because I've worked in the government pretty much my entire adult life, and I definitely came by more ignorance than I did malice.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so you've got that, you've just got all these bad stories, the stories of the Nantinaq, kind of circulating. They kind of grow and expand. But like I said, there was Bigfoot sightings there. There was a
Mhm.
gentleman in the 20s named Sergius Moonen. He saw one walking along the beach. He said it was carrying a club, which I think that's a fascinating story, because I want to know why I use the word club and not stick or branch.
Mhm.
Like, was there something special about it that he
Yeah, it's
made
pretty
the reference to a
specific,
club?
isn't it? Yeah.
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 Was it like, would it have like something wrapped around the handle and the Nantinaq's initials like carved on it? Like, why did he call it a club and not like just a stick? Uh, so while and you hear people trying to debunk it in
Mhm.
different ways. There's one that's going around about how, like, oh, that's the year they finished the highway, and they built the highway down to reach Homer, and that's what killed the town. Well, I mean, okay, but why is there still Soldovia, Nanwalek, and Port Graham? Like, there's still 3 villages over there across the bay that are still there today.
Right.
Why didn't they die when the highway was built?
Right.
So, people have come up with a lot of stories to try and debunk it and get rid of it. But you still, there's still something to it.
Mhm. Mhm.
It may not be the Bigfoot massacre that everybody makes it out to be, but there's still some validity to it, I feel. And especially, I mean, you're looking at it on a map. It's at the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula.
Yeah.
You're as far south as you can get. Uh, in my opinion, I mean, that's a perfect storm, because, okay, you've got if these creatures live there, which I'm fairly certain they do, you've got them pushed down basically to the southern tip. They can't go anywhere else. The ocean's behind them. That's it. You've got this town here. They're catching up all the fish. They're cutting down all the trees. I mean, that's a perfect storm for territory protection if I ever heard it.
Mhm.
So that, in my mind, could explain some of the aggressive behavior and aggressive stories that come out of the area.
Protecting territory.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
you've basically pushed them into a corner up against the ocean there, and they've got nowhere else to go. You're catching all the fish. You're cutting down all the trees, and it might just be the perfect storm for them to go, okay, that's enough.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if that's the case, I mean, does that lend any credence at all to these deaths that are reported? Because there seemed like an overabundance of just kind of weird disappearances, and of course, Mr. Camlock's death. There's an element of just really mystery there, and I know humans like to apply, something to the mystery to give themselves an answer. But if there is a creature up there that's highly protective of its resources and its territory, I mean, could that lend itself to those?
I think so, especially if you've got. I mean, these are people that have spent most of their lives, if not all their lives, in Alaska. They were born here. They grow up hunting. I feel like you kind of have to. If they say, like, okay, we found this body and it's mutilated in a way that a bear wouldn't do, I kind of feel. I mean, these are people that spent their entire lives hunting bear and moose and in the woods, and if they say something like that, I kind of feel you have to lean toward their opinion
Yeah.
as being an expert opinion. So, there were stories about, like, body parts washing up in the lagoon, bodies being found mutilated in a way that a bear wouldn't do. And unfortunately, like, I couldn't confirm a lot of this. It was just kind of just word of mouth stories.
Yeah.
If I had more information, for example, I told you I was looking for Mr. Camlock's death certificate. And I spent a lot of time looking for it. And I contacted someone at the state records office, and they found his, excuse me, I found his son's birth certificate. Or no, I'm sorry. I found his son's death certificate,
Hmm.
which confirmed that Andrew Camlock existed, and
Yeah.
he was born in Port Chatham, or Port Chatham. Remind me to touch you on that later,
Okay.
because there's some confusion over that. But I confirmed that Mr. Camlock existed. He was born in Portlock, and his son died when the son was 14. He actually died of drowning. Um, so but the lady that was helping me look, she could not find Mr. Camlock's death certificate. And she actually told me, she's like, maybe you should try the Homer Police Department,
Mm-hmm.
not knowing that I worked there. And I was like, well, trust me, lady, it's not
Yeah.
there. But yeah, I think probably there might be some of these death certificates and accounts, some corroborating. You know what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. I
So
know. Corroborating.
there might be some collaborative evidence like tucked away in some family Bibles in some of these
Mm-hmm.
native villages, or maybe in some of the churches, and they just kind of haven't been discovered yet. And plus, this is Alaska. Like, it's not super uncommon for you to be looking for a record or something, and you can call up some little village or something like, hey, I'm looking for this police report or whatever. And they're like, oh, yeah, that stuff was out in the storage shed and the roof collapsed 3 years ago because of snow load, and all that stuff
Right.
was lost.
Right.
It's not super uncommon for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And especially back then, in the 30s and 40s, Alaska wasn't even a state. So there wasn't a whole lot of like, you will keep these records and you will like keep them in this manner. So there wasn't a whole lot of oversight on that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of times, like if you call the Alaska Territorial Police, you know, they'll show up when they can show up. You know, like, oh, there's a storm moving in. We'll be there. You know, we'll be there on Thursday, and it's
Oh,
like Monday or something. You know, that still kind of happens today in some really remote places with the troopers. Like, somebody will call me like, we need help, and they'll be like, best we can do is Thursday.
oh no.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, you do what you can do. Yeah, well, okay. What's the confusion first? And then I had a follow-up question to all that.
So there's Port Chatham and there's Port Lock.
Okay.
Port Chatham is the name of the bay, the body of water, and Port Lock is the name of the town.
Mm-hmm.
So people here pretty much use them interchangeably. Like if I say Port Chatham, people understand I mean
I
probably
get
Port
it.
Lock.
Yeah.
Um, there's been some. I've heard it said that there was a town called Port Chatham and there was a town called Port Lock. That's not true. Port Chatham is the bay. Port Lock is the town situated in the bay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but Port Chatham was named for one of an explorer's ship. It was a HMS Chatham, and Portlock was named for Captain Nathaniel Portlock, who came up here in the 1700s and mapped the area. And even he back then in the 1700s was like, holy cow, this place is amazing. Like, look at it, all these resources and the fish and the trees. So it's an impressive area.
Yeah.
There's a lot to offer here.
Yeah, you really get to see the beauty of it in the documentary, and I was salivating over the blueberries, just blueberries as far as you can see. Well, just on one side, but yeah, tons of just natural resources, and it's just really a beautiful area. Scary, creepy, but beautiful. Um, what I wanted to follow up with was because we were kind of talking about just the mystery of the deaths and the disappearances in the area, people thinking it's kind of an evil location. What were, and I'm referencing something you said in your book, what were some of the other legends of the area? There was some other stuff going on.
So there's the legend of the Dark Lady, which I haven't been able to find this anywhere else except in that interview with Melania Kell. And that was a story of a ghostly woman in a dark dress that would walk up and down the beach. And like I said, I've only seen that in that one place. My favorite story, other that's not Bigfoot, is about the kid on the dock, where there's a gentleman. He's coming in from fishing for the day or whatever he's doing, and he's walking by this. I can't remember if it was one kid or a group of kids, but there's a kid sitting on the dock, and he walks by and he kind of thinks, well, that's kind of weird because back then, people respected their elders more, especially in Native communities, and it was unusual for an elder to walk by and somebody not, oh, hey, hey, Grandpa, how you doing or whatever. And he's like, well, I'm going to turn around and say something to those kids, and he turned around and they were gone. And in my mind, I always picture like that creepy kid from, was it The Grudge? Like that white pasty kid. Like that's all I always picture, like that kid just sitting on the dock staring off,
Oh,
and then the guy turns around and he's gone. Um,
I didn't
but
think
that's
you
kind
could
of
make
my
this whole
favorite
story
people.
worse. That's
Yeah.
it's worse now.
And then there's the story of the one-eyed people, which is just like, that's crazy. So there's these hunters out one day, and they see some other hunters in a bidarka. It's like a little canoe, and they're like, who are those guys? Like, we don't recognize them. They must be from not from around here. So they try and catch up with them, and the other hunters like are trying to get away from them, like trying to paddle away from them, and they're like, this is really weird behavior. What's going on? So they pursue them, end up catching up to them, and finally, they're kind of like, hey, how's it going? If you're listening to this in audio, I'm like I'm shielding my face, as I'm talking. They're like, hey, how's it going? And eventually they get them to look at them, and they only have like one eye in the center of their forehead. And they end up talking with them, and they're like, yeah, we're the one-eyed people. We're from another village, like over here, far away, and we don't interact with you guys because you're mean to us. They make fun of us, and we just kind of keep to ourselves. And they ended up like speaking. They were nice to them, and they ended up trading some meat with them and stuff, and sent them on their way. And then they never saw them again. And that's one of the kind of the weirder stories that comes out of the Port Chatham area is these mysterious one-eyed people. And it's almost a lot of it kind of almost reminds me of like Skinwalker Ranch stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you just have these odd being, you've got the Bigfoot stuff, you've got ghost stuff, you've got these like strange unearthly people with the one eye in their head. And a lot of it, I wonder sometimes, especially like when it seemed to ramp up in like the 30s and stuff. Like, remember when the family moved on to Skinwalker Ranch, they told them like, well, whatever you do, don't dig.
Mm-hmm.
And then they started building this village in Portlock, and they started putting up all these buildings, and I'm sure there was some digging and just a lot of disturbances going on in the earth and stuff like that. And it makes me wonder almost if that isn't a similar area to like Skinwalker Ranch, and them maybe bringing in all the infrastructure might have disturbed something. I don't know. It's just it's an odd theory.
Well, it's an interesting theory, though. All you need is a good UFO sighting over it, and then it's in the bag.
Well, there was a flap here in the 70s in the Catchmack Bay.
No kidding.
Yeah, I've had several people talk to me about UFOs. There was like a flap just all like there for a long time. I think it was a year or so. People were seeing UFOs.
Huh.
And there's a gentleman, Chook from Chook's Outdoors. He grew up here in Homer, and he remembers there's a lot of artists in Homer. It's a very artsy community. He remembers seeing a lady that she had all these paintings of like this, the mountains and the skyline, and there would be these like balls of light and like UFOs, and she was painting what she was seeing. And he just told me about that recently. Like, I just recently met up with him, and we had a discussion. But yeah, there's been some UFO flaps here. It doesn't correspond with the stuff going on in Port Chatham in the 30s to the 50s, but this was in the 70s when there was definitely a UFO flap here in the Catchmack Bay area.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Well, one more question on the documentary, and then we're going to wrap it up here soon. Sorry. I appreciate your time. Uh, where was there ever a moment as you were heading out there? You already had all this information. You had that starter information. You'd done your research. You knew the legends, the creepy factor. Was there a moment as you were heading out there that you just felt like full on fear at what you guys were doing, at what you were about to do?
Not really. I think my excitement kind of overwhelmed my fear. Um, there were some times when we went out the second time to film the Travel Channel show that I got a little creeped out, sketched out because of the weather, and there were periods like where like, okay, let's go ashore and film, and as soon as we would make that decision, the weather would get like worse, like the wind would pick up. There was a point where I thought we were gonna our little skiff was going to get turned over because the waters were so rough. And it kind of started out as a joke, like, oh, somebody doesn't want us here. Like, basically every time without fail that we decided to go ashore, the weather would get worse.
Yeah.
And it started out as a joke, and then by the time it was over, I was like, oh, there might be something to this, because every time I felt like something didn't want us there.
Yeah.
And but the first time, no. After I left the first time, I was like, man, I would like to build a cabin out there. Like, I want to buy some land near there and buy a cabin and just go like live off the grid and look for Bigfoot for a while. Like I didn't really get a fear vibe off of the place back then. The first time, I really enjoyed myself. I wanted to go back. I wanted to spend more time there. But the second time, I was kind of like, okay, I'm done with this place.
Yeah. Your second trip there was a bit more arduous and less fruitful, as I recall you, saying. Um, Last bit here, and then we'll head into our final segment here, is actually about your second trip. You described seeing something that was a bit unusual, and I was just curious what your thoughts were on it now that some time has passed and you've been able to look back on that.
Is this the second trip
The second trip,
or the first trip? Okay.
yeah, on the second trip, you were standing in the doorway and you looked out and you saw something.
Yeah. Well, it was a window. It wasn't, and
Oh,
it
okay.
didn't. It had no glass in it. It was just like a square hole
Oh,
in the
okay. Okay.
cabin. We were in this little cabin. It's the one on the cover of my book, actually. If you Google Port Chatham, you're going to see like that cabin, and we were actually in there filming, and I was kind of standing toward the back of the cabin, trying to be quiet, and I was just looking. It had been raining, but it wasn't raining, I don't think, at the time. And there was maybe a slight breeze, but not a hard wind. And I remember just seeing something like drop out of a tree. And the best I can explain it is it was almost like maybe kind of a small beach ball shaped blur, kind of like the Predator, like the glimmer, like when he's invisible and you can see through him, but you can still see something there.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't have like a defined human shape. It was kind of round, and I saw it just like fall down, like and it like when it hit branches, the branches reacted like something was on, like something was hitting them as it went down. And I just remember thinking like, huh, that's weird. And it had been raining earlier, so I'm trying to rationalize like how did that much water get get caught in this tree and then fall down.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, like does not compute, and I'm instead of saying something, I'm just like, huh, that was weird. What was that? And, of course I didn't film it. I didn't have any cameras going. They were filming behind me. I think they were interviewing either Adam or Steven. And I was just like, huh, that's kind of weird. What the hell was that? Thinking it was some kind of weird like rainfall or some water had gotten trapped in this like pine tree and fallen out. And then later on, it's my turn to sit down and be interviewed, and Steven's standing back where I was, and we're doing the interview, and Steven like racks his shotgun like, and he's like, "There's something out there. Something was just growling at me," and it was coming from the same area.
Hmm.
So I don't know if it was a coincidence. I don't know if maybe there was a bear or something back there, and I just happened to, and maybe it was water that I saw foul of the tree. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, if I had seen it like a defined shape and like movement, I would be like, oh, I saw the Glimmer Man, or I saw this, or I saw that. But it was so ambiguous. I mean, I feel it was odd enough that I mentioned it. Obviously, I put it in the book, but at the same time, I'm like, there could be a rational explanation for it.
Sure.
I don't know. The first trip when I got the thermal footage was almost kind of similar. We can talk about that for a second, real quick,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
we're walking through this like open area, kind of like a field, and there's a tree line in front of us, and Mary, the female with us, is like, "Hey, do you feel kind of weird, like we're being watched?" And I was like, maybe a little bit. I mean, we're in the woods; it's always, there's a creepy feeling. And I threw my thermal up, which is just a thermal scout. It's got a range of about 100 yards, which not even really. I mean, if you're honestly,
Mm-hmm.
it says 100 yards, but at 100 yards, you might be, yeah, there's something out there, but it looks like a speck. So whatever it was definitely closer to us than 100 yards, probably, I would say 50 to 40. So I'm looking into this tree line, and I see, the only way I can describe it is it look like Donkey Kong, like the outline of Donkey Kong from Nintendo games. And it's doing this. It's raising its arms up and down, just like that. And, I know about the history of Bigfoot sightings in the area. We're there looking for Bigfoot. That's what we're doing. I see something on my thermal that's obviously not any of us, and it looks human shaped. And what do? I hand my camera, my thermal camera, over to one of the other guys, and was like, "Hey, look over there. What do you see?"
Mm-hmm.
And it was our cameraman's brother, Toad, who was a younger guy. I think he was like, I don't even know if he was in his 20s at that point. And he looks through the monocular, the thermal, and he goes, "It looks like a dude." And like, and then he like they passed it around to like two or three everybody. I mean, it was great that I got that confirmation. Everybody that was there saw it,
Yeah.
but and I nobody hit record, and I didn't hit record until they handed it back to me. And at that point, we're kind of walking towards it, and it had started to like move back into the like it just. And it's not the kind of terrain where you can just like, I'm going to look through this thermal and walk forward. Like, you have to stop and look down and step over this branch or move around this like puddle. You know, it's not like you can just charge forward. So I'm like taking a look down, taking a look down, and it just kind of melds back into the forest. Um, and I always say, like, man, if I'd have hit record like 30 seconds sooner, like I would be probably the best thermal footage ever. And it's, I guess they call it the curse of Bigfoot, you know, where you see something and you're like, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, well, I'm here. Steven's over there. Josiah's over there. Mary's right here. You know, like, you're just like, it's got to be one of us. Although, wait, no, I can see everybody. What? And then you're passing the camera around, like, do you see that? You know, you're just in such disbelief, and that's what you're there looking for.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's kind of happened to me a couple of times where I've just been like, where you see something really out of place and you don't really say anything because you're like, ah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the curse of Bigfoot, that's paranormal and supernatural world wide. I feel like too. I'm more familiar with like in a ghost hunt, and your
Yeah.
batteries drain, or you both hear something. There's no way to. Yeah. There's always something, man.
I've never had the battery drain thing. I did one time though. I was in a graveyard and I was kind of doing like a little ghost hunt thing, and I had this audio recorder that I mean, used for years and years before that, and years after that, and never had an issue with. And I was walking through the graveyard, like talking to my recorder, and it died. The batteries didn't drain; it just died.
Yeah. 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 Well, that's it. That's it. Oh man. Well, thank you so much for that. Let's go ahead and wrap it up here shortly. Let's hit our final segment. We'll do final questions, final thoughts, and I'll let you go and get on with your day. First question I've got for you. I wanted to know, what is the most definitive piece of evidence that you have ever found or that you've played a part in finding?
Oh, geez. I think I'd have to give two answers to that. One would be some of the footprints that we found in Washington during the Bigfoot encounters of the Pacific Northwest.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we were in an area that just, I mean, was some pretty rough terrain, pretty not necessarily hard to get to, just not super easy. A lot of deadfall on the ground, a lot of sharp things on the ground, and we found some small bare footprints, like in this little puddle, like this little watering hole. And then we found more similar tracks, like that we were able to track them and follow them, like they went this way. And then the second part of that answer would probably be the handprint in Area A. Hopefully, I mean, to be disclosed on what the results of that is, but it's such a bizarre, like, I don't know how that it got there. It's just
Yeah.
baffles me.
It's a weird one, but yeah, I can't wait for those results too. We'll all be waiting. Second question for you. What is a common newbie mistake while out looking for Sasquatch?
Oh, I don't think we have enough time for me to.
Oh no.
um, my I'll just give two short answers. One, use some kind of scale in your photographs. When you take a pic, when you find something on the ground, especially footprints, use some kind of, like, put down a dollar, put down a pin, or even better, like have some kind of little like 6-inch ruler or something to put down and take pictures. The second one part of that would be if you see something and it drives me crazy. People take a picture of something and they'll say, look right there, that's the Bigfoot, or that's whatever, the dog man, or whatever it was. And they'll draw like a little picture around it, or they'll draw a circle around it. But then there's no follow-up picture to show that it's not there, or that
Oh.
it moves. It's just the one picture. So if you're going to, video is best, but if you're going to take pictures, take follow-up pictures. If there's something behind a thicket and you're only getting glimpses of it, take another picture after it leaves so we can see the exact same area with nothing there. That's one of my pet peeves. If I see something and there's no like follow-up picture that shows movement or a change
Mm-hmm.
in the whatever they're claiming is a cryptid, I usually just discount it.
Yeah, like what's the stasis? What's the normal here? I would have never thought of that, but that is incredibly important. All right. Final question for you. So you have a prior law enforcement experience. Some of the funniest people that I've ever met are officers, firemen, paramedics, because y'all gotta be. Would you would you leave us with just a funny or just interesting favorite story?
Yeah. So I'll tell you this. It's not too gruesome. So I'll tell you this one. I was out driving around on patrol one day and I see this bright canary yellow Crown Vic coming toward me. It used to be a taxi and somebody had, bought it and was driving it around. So it's this bright canary yellow car, drives by. I look and I see the person driving it and I know who it is. Like, it's a small town. I'm like, oh, that's so and so. We'll call him Johnny. I was like, that's Johnny. I was like, Johnny ain't got no driver's license. So I called dispatch. I'm like, does Johnny have his driver's license yet? And they're like, no, Johnny's driver's license is still suspended. So I was like, that's what I thought. So I turn around on him, pull him over. And this kid, I've dealt with him. Obviously, I knew who he was. So I've dealt with him before. And I get him out of the car and I'm like, Johnny, you don't have no license. It's still suspended. You're not supposed to be driving. He's like, I know, I'm sorry. And I said, so I'm going to cite him for driving without a license. And I felt bad for him. And I thought, I'm going to give him a little advice. And I said, son, I said, you're not exactly inconspicuous driving around in this bright yellow car. And he goes, officer, I swear I wasn't trying to be inconspicuous. And it took me a second. And I'm like, he thinks I'm accusing him of another crime, of inconspicuousity or something. So we had a discussion. I was like, that's not what that means. I just meant that you were really easy to see in this yellow car. Maybe you should think about getting something else. And he's like, oh, okay. So that was a funny, like, kind of lighthearted story.
I like that. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. We're going to wrap it up here. Do you have anything coming up that you want to shout out?
Geez, no. Check out my podcast, Alasquatch. I have a website, alasquatchpodcast.com. I've got a little store in there. You can buy all my books. I'll autograph them for you if you want. If you're not interested in that, you can get them all from Amazon. I've got other things like t-shirts and little like Alaska centric stickers and stuff in there too. You can pick up. I've got the Dark Coast series. It's still coming out on Small Town Monsters. I'm not sure when the next one's coming out. The last one just dropped just this last Sunday. And I've got some other stuff coming up next year that I still in the planning stages. Can't really talk about, but some Alaska cryptid hijinks up here doing something.
All right. Very cool. Yeah, and I'll put all those links, whatever you want, down in the show notes. I just one final bit. Help me take out the episode. Do you have any final thoughts, words of wisdom, or a piece of advice you would like to leave with us?
Oh, geez. Yeah, have an open mind, but not so open that your brain falls out.
Larry Beans Baxter, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I'll tell you something else I'm thankful for. Mr. Beans Baxter joining me on the show this week. Listeners, pick up copies of his books, tune into his show, Alasquatch, and stay abreast of any upcoming events or projects that he's got coming up at the links below. Follow the show on social at Paranorm Girl Pod. If you really enjoyed today's episode, please rate 5 stars on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching this over on YouTube, give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe. If you haven't yet, I sure do appreciate it. That is going to be a wrap for today. I wish you all a very nice holiday. Go make some good memories. I will catch you guys next week. Until we meet again, stay safe, keep the nightlight on, and sleep with one eye open.
Okay, here's how Miro works. See, it's amazing.
What's everyone doing at David's desk?
Ever since marketing started using Miro's collaborative online whiteboard, he thinks all our other teams should sign up.
Why?
He says Miro's making his meetings disappear. And if every team gets on it, that means even less meetings. They're using Miro for brainstorms, mind maps, customer research.
So could we use Miro instead of having another 100 meetings for every round of feedback?
Yep. You can comment, react to ideas, even leave a recording on the board.
And what about presentations?
There are Miro templates for that.
How do you know so much about Miro?
I've actually been using it all along. I just used a Miro board to plan the best vacation.
Okay, I'm on board.
See how Miro users save up to 80 hours every year by meeting less and doing more. Get on board at Miro.com with 3 boards free forever. That's MIRO.com.
Is there anything more satisfying than finding something that perfectly lines up with your taste and checks all the boxes? Like getting the perfect fit with a suit from Indochino. Their suits are made to measure and totally customizable with endless options. From timeless classics to bold statements, you can express your style exactly how you want. Choose your own cut, fabric, lining, buttons, lapels, and more to create the suit of your dreams, all at a surprisingly affordable price. They also offer fully customizable blazers, pants, outerwear, women's wear, and more. Every Indochino piece is made to your exact measurements, and they make getting measured easy. Simply set up your measurement profile in less than 10 minutes. You can send your measurements online from the comfort of your home or make an appointment at one of our showrooms. Find the perfect fit with Indochino. Go to Indochino.com and use code PODCAST to get 10% off any purchase of $3.99 or more. That's 10% off with code PODCAST.